Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of the Emotional Bankroll podcast, a series where I interview DFS pros about the mental health and lifestyle of playing DFS for a living. You may have the financial means to go pro, but do you have the emotional bankroll to deal with the highs and lows? I'm Brian Jester, and in this episode, I chat with Justin MacMahan, who you probably know on Twitter, at Justin MacMahan, or TheHumanCespedes on DraftKings. Justin is the co-founder of Daily Fantasy Insider and a top 50 ranked player in the Roto Grinders rankings. I talked with Justin about how he grew his current bankroll from just initial deposit, how social media impacts your mental health, how to create a balanced lifestyle, having financial transparency with your partner, and how to learn to trust other people's work. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe, either here on YouTube or in your favorite podcast app. We're releasing new episodes every single week. Give us a thumbs up or a 5-star review if you really enjoyed the series. And if there is a DFS personality or pro that you'd like to hear from, hit me up on Twitter at BrianJesterFF and let me know who you'd love to hear from. Enjoy the show. All right, let's bring him in. It is Justin. Justin, what's up, man? Thanks for taking the time out of your day to join the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
For sure. So as you know, this podcast is about mental health and DFS and the process and the highs and lows and dealing with the lifestyle of being a DFS player. And a lot of people, Justin, want to know how high-level DFS players got to the point where they are today. So let's take a look back at your origin story for a second here. So how did you get to the point where you're at now? Because I know you won the Playboy Mansion Championship on FanDuel back in 2016. You won a FanDuel Monster in 2015. Both of those were $100,000 scores. So talk to me about how those wins fit into your DFS bankroll journey and then how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, so just getting started was I can thank UNC for this. Freshman year of college, I was on a scholarship for financial need, and one of the things that they do they're called a Covenant Scholar at UNC. I think it's about 12% of the student body, and what they do for you is they cover all of your expenses, and then they also give you $1,500 a semester of spending money. Well, I was asking the other kids in the program, I was like, what do we do with this spending money? Because there's nothing left for us to buy. They covered everything, like food, board, books, and gave us a new computer, everything. And they were like, well, we just put it on FanDuel and just basically gamble with it. And I was like, all right, sick, I'm down. So I started playing baseball contests on FanDuel, usually just 10, 20 bucks. And I discovered something early on. It sounds so basic now, but like 8 years ago, no one was really on this, which was that batters in baseball and pitchers have reverse splits. And you'd get a guy who was a left-handed hitter facing a left-handed pitcher with reverse splits, which means that he actually hits lefties better than righties. You'd get him 1% owned like every time. So I was just loading up my team with 1-2% owned guys. And that's kind of how I got started, is just identifying that there's a lot of leverage in this situation. So no matter how good the other picks on the slate were, I would just go all in on reverse splits. And whenever it hit, it would hit big because they were so low owned. So I started building my bankroll that way, hitting a couple of $10, $20 GPPs, got up to about $4,000. And then, no joke, the first time I decided I'm going to take a step up into a bigger contest, I joined the 333 on FanDuel and instantly hit 100K. So that's the one that really changed everything for me. It changed my lifestyle, and most wins now don't really change your lifestyle, but that one was the biggest lifestyle change ever. We started flying around the country, going to games, and just having a great time. Kept up with our classes, but definitely skipped a few. And then when I got qualified that same baseball season for the Playboy Mansion, and then after we won that is when I realized, okay, now people are blowing me up for picks every day. Everyone that knows me is texting me asking who to pick on. Who are the reverse splits today? Who do I pick on FanDuel? And so I decided I got to start putting these picks out somewhere. So that's when I made the Twitter account. Actually, I was never even on Twitter in high school or in college. I made the account just for posting those picks, and it just started growing faster than I thought it might. And I just thought, hey, maybe there's a real business here. And so that's how it all got started.
That's awesome. And I hear a lot of pros, and I've had experienced this myself, where they take that shot. And you hear it for sports betting, you hear it for poker, and oftentimes it doesn't work out. But many times, a lot of the success stories are when people take a shot and they hit. And sometimes you take a shot haphazardly, and you probably shouldn't be doing it. But there are other times when you think you have an edge and it needs to be exploited before it's figured out, and you take that bankroll jump. So I know you did take that chance on that contest, but if that didn't hit, how well equipped do you think you mentally and your bankroll would have been to just start back over and get to that point again?
Yeah, so I would have, I had about 4 grand to my name when I took that shot. I think I had 400 in play that night. So I had 10% of my net cash, net worth, I guess, in on that slate, which is dicey. And honestly, it's very lucky that it worked out, right? Like, there's no way that you can ever be sure you're going to hit. I've had bigger edges than I had that night that didn't hit. So you just never know. And it's anyone who has succeeded in this space, they better tell you that they've gotten lucky to get to this point, because there's a lot of luck involved, and we're not out there playing. We're not the ones controlling it. So you have to acknowledge that there's some element of luck on the nights that you took your first big shot panning out, because I think I would have probably taken 3 or 4 more big shots at it. And if I missed all of those, I would have concluded that this is not safe enough, and I should take my 2 grand and be happy with it. Probably would have scaled back down to playing $10, $20. And it's very hard to go from $10, $20 a night to hitting 100K on those contests. It's possible. I've seen people do it. We have a couple of users that now play high stakes that were playing $5, $10 contests and hit it big, but it's very hard. I've only won a contest with more than 40,000 entries. I think I've only come in first one time. I play one lineup a night, so it's a lot harder without max entering. But yeah, I mean, I've been playing for 8 years and I've only won a 40,000 person contest once. I've been second, third a few times, but that just shows how difficult it is. No matter how good you are, it's very hard to come in first out of that many people.
Right, and I'll start by saying that 10% is a lot different than 100% on a shot, right? If you take a 100% shot, that's going to pan out poorly more often than not. But a 10% shot, I think, is okay from time to time. And so you mentioned you only play one lineup per night now, and you say it now, but if you look at your Roto Grinders profile, you look at your Twitter, you see that you're mostly a high stakes, small field DFS player. And what is your reasoning for focusing on high stakes as opposed to really focusing on 150 max in larger contests, say as much as some of the other top DFS players?
Yeah, I think that the higher the stakes you go, and I talk about this a lot in the war room, so this won't be new for anyone who's familiar with me. But if you're not, I think the reason for high stakes over low stakes is the amount of leverage that you can count on. In lower stakes, the best plays on the slate probably going to be, in a sport like golf, let's say, probably going to be 25, maybe 30% max if it's just a smash play. That same guy in high stakes will be 50 to 70% owned. And in a sport like basketball, where it's really all math, it's all about models and projections for basketball. There's very little narrative speculation. You can count on the best plays of the slate being over 90% owned in high stakes contests. And that is dependable leverage. And by that, I mean you cannot play that guy and know that if he busts, if he gets injured, foul trouble, misses every shot, whatever, he is going to be in almost every single lineup. So you can get such extreme leverage in higher stakes. And given that that's where I view my advantage is really, really projecting ownership. I've had so many slates for NFL where it's a 3 or 4 game slate, and I'll project, okay, I'll say I think Mahomes is going to be 71% in the 3K 100-person contest, and he's exactly 70 or 71. Like, I can get it almost exactly right, having just been through so many slates over the years. So that's where I see my biggest advantage, and that's why I don't max enter, because that's a lot more about knowing how to work the tools, really. It's about how to correlate your stacks, how to kind of cover a lot of different angles and bases. And I think that there could be an edge to be had there, but it takes a lot more time. I think that the people that max enter every day, they spend their whole day on it. And I only have to spend a few hours slate to build one lineup.
And I think there are a couple of key points there that you mentioned. First of all, when the ownership is increased in higher stakes, and especially in variant sports like golf, like for some golfer in a field of 140 golfers to be 50, 60% owned is absolutely insane. And that's just incredible leverage. So there's no surprise that you've had success in those contests. But on another note, the fact that you play the same contest pretty much every single night at a high stakes level with smaller field, with most of the time the same types of entrants, Justin, you're able to know pretty much what's going to happen, and that makes your lineup building a lot easier, where instead of, like you said, in large field contests, you're playing more of the math game, you're playing the optimizers. Here you can play the opponents and what typically wins in those types of contests, which is just a massive edge, especially when the pros who are entering those contests most of the time aren't optimizing their lineup for that specific contest.
Right. Yeah, it's typically you're getting their cash lineup or their optimal lineup in a contest like that. And over time, it becomes very easy to predict what they're going to do. So I can look at like a 3-person 10K and there's 2 people sitting in the contest. I can decide if I want to jump in and be that 3rd person based on what those 2 people will play. And I just know, okay, there's 5-6 people that jump in those contests. I basically know their process by now. I've kind of back tested what their lineups end up being to various projection sources. And that's the danger of going off projections, is that someone like me can pinpoint where you're getting your picks from. Now I can just go look up what their lineup is probably going to be. So I think that makes me the hardest player to play against if you wanted to predict my lineup, which they don't. They don't care. So if you ask them who's the hardest person to play against, I don't think they even think about me.
Or anyone for that matter, probably.
Or anyone for that matter, right. They just say, I don't play against anyone. I play against myself. I use projections and I build the best lineup. But there's a lot of people on DraftKings that are playing high stakes and losing money and they don't realize because they don't really care. It's all about the reputation or the fun, the thrill of it. And that's great. We need people like that. Otherwise, this doesn't work. So I'm not going to shame any specific people, and I'm not here to make anybody feel bad about the way that they play. It's just there has to be some people playing that way. And so that's where I think the edge is for me.
For sure. And I've heard you say in the past that you're not a math heavy guy who does predictive modeling. I know people who work for your site do this. And I think a lot of casual players believe that that's necessary or required to be a successful DFS player. So are there any non-math skills or any type of background or education that you think helps you with your DFS game that is outside of this predictive modeling area?
Yeah, I think that the most important skills you can have for this are logic-based skills. You have to find spots where computers can't replace your brain. And that can be tricky for some people, but I think if you wanted to just focus on one area, it's like, well, how do I do that? The one area that makes me better than, a player just using computers is you have to be able to ballpark expected value without complete information. So everyone is trying to calculate expected value all the time, but an expected value is like, it's essentially the same thing as a mean projection. It's like, if you take a bell curve of this player's outcomes, what will happen in the 50th percentile? That's what most projections focus on. But if you're just kind of using your brain and you're willing to not have exact information, you can kind of ballpark, well, what does the upper 10% of this bell curve look like? What does the bottom 10% of this bell curve look like? And you can kind of guess your own floor and ceiling projections. They don't have to be exactly right. And I think that's the problem, is people want it all to come down to one number. They want to say this player's ceiling is 55, his mean is 40, and his floor is 32. I don't know if you can get floor and ceiling that exact, especially in a sport like baseball or football where there's massive swings that can happen on one play. It's very hard for a model to like really project that correctly. And even if it does, no one's really using floor ceiling. They're mostly just using mean projections. And so I like to be able to think, okay, we don't have complete information here. There's a guy who's questionable and we don't know how injured he is. Situations like that are great. It's like, let me read about what other people are doing, kind of gather up what I think most people are interpreting this as, and then let me just play the other side of the scenario. So if most people are thinking, okay, Julian Edelman is limping around last week, now he's questionable this week, I doubt he's going to be full strength. Build your mental projections as if he's full strength. And how does that change the slate? Would you not play Jacoby Myers because of that? And this was an example from a couple of years ago that I won with, where he was questionable, and almost everyone said he's an easy fade because he's probably hurt. And I just remember thinking, well, we have no way of knowing that. This is incomplete information. They say he's going to play, so we can't be sure that he's actually hurt. I mean, I think that's one area. It's like people assume they plug something into the models, and if everyone is plugging the same thing into the models, which is like, in that case, it's like a minus 20% or minus 30% filter on Edelman's projections, just take that off of your model. Don't use it. And see what your model would project. If he still projects badly, then don't play him. And you don't even have to have a model. You could just be using somebody else's and just modify it in your head. I don't know if that all makes sense, but that's kind of the areas that I'm looking for. Is like I don't follow things like NBA defense versus position, because it's already built into our model so accurately. We can just back test how much DVP matters, and then we can just have the model evaluate that correctly. So I'll see people say, well, I really like this guy because the Heat are really bad against centers, or really good against this position. And I just kind of think, well, the model doesn't love that guy, and I know that that's already factored into the model. So I'm not going to give him extra boost. And I think it's a huge mistake people make, is that they give a guy an extra boost based on some random factor that they just came across, or they just read some article about how this guy's course history is really good at the Masters. It's like, yeah, but he's playing like shit. So all that needs to be factored in. You can't just take one piece of information and just run with that all the way, because now you're taking the weights of the model and you're altering them yourself haphazardly, and that's kind of a dangerous game to play. So I hope all of that is interesting and helpful and makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And you make a lot of great points there. And obviously, you're very confident in your process now. And I know pretty much everyone, when they first start playing DFS, they don't have that success. They don't have that confidence. So at what point, Justin, did you become confident in your DFS ability to the point where you realized you can make significant money doing this? And off of that, you won the 100K twice in however long it was back in 2014, 2015. Were you super level-headed about it? Or because you were younger at the time compared to most people who hit the bigger scores in their DFS career, do you think your maturity impacted how you viewed those wins?
Yeah, I think that I think I stayed pretty level-headed, and I actually I had some friends that were like, wow, I can't believe I would be going nuts. Yeah, I just, after the first one, I was just kind of in shock, because I knew everything was about to change. And I had some friends pull me aside and say, everything's about to change now. Like, you just went from one of the poorest kids on this campus to one of the richest kids on this campus, and things are going to change for you as a result. And they were right. But after the Playboy Mansion one, my focus shifted more to like business. I thought, okay, there's a real opportunity here. And I kind of locked in, if anything. I think I like almost started partying less after that one. And I was like, I'm going to really put this money to good use, and actually try to leverage it to grow a real brand and a business out of this. And after that Playboy Mansion, that was when I really gained the confidence. I think going to a live final really helps people gain confidence in the space, because you meet the people that you thought were really, really good, and you just thought, oh man, there's no way I could compete with these guys.
You think they're invincible, right? And then you see them in person,
yeah.
You're like, wait, no, I can beat them.
And it's not that they look, it's nothing about their appearance. I'm not trying to say that, oh, well, they're all short and fat or whatever. It's that you meet them and chat with them and you realize, oh, they're just normal guys. Mm-hmm. You meet a guy and I'm like, yeah, well, I didn't like that play because he doesn't hit curveballs well. And they're like, oh, I don't even know how to look that up. How do you see that? And you're like, oh my gosh. Like, I've been so afraid to play this guy, thinking that he's got some like mega sharp insights, and he doesn't even know how to look up like pitch values. And not that that's the end all be all, but it just helps you, going to those events helps you realize, oh, these are mostly just kind of sports fans like me. They're pretty casual, and I do think that this is a beatable space. And I don't know if you'll always get that impression depending on who you talk to, but that was just how I felt after leaving the Playboy Mansion. I felt like, okay, I can hang with these guys, and I can beat these guys. And I don't know if I really believed it after the first win. But after winning the live final and meeting them, that was when I really had confidence.
Sounds good. All right, let's pivot a little bit and talk about social media, because we can't talk about mental health in DFS or just in general if we don't discuss social media and Twitter specifically. So you tweet frequently, you post a lot of screenshots, and I've heard you talk in the past about trolls and sometimes tilting people with your tweets. Do you think that your Twitter account is a polarizing account in the DFS world?
That's an interesting question. I think it depends how you define polarizing. I think of that word as kind of pushing people to one side or the other, like the kind of person that people say, oh, you either love them or you hate them. And I don't think that that's me. I think there's a lot of people who are very indifferent towards me. They're like, they follow me and they're like, yeah, I know that guy. I don't think that they would say that they're a huge fan or they really hate me. But I do think that the one way that I might be polarizing is just because of my age. I think there were some older people in the space that were ready to dislike me kind of no matter what. And conversely, there were a lot of young people in the space, a lot of college students that would go to bat for me without even really knowing anything about me. I think there were there were times early on where some older guys were arguing with younger guys about me. And I thought, well, I guess in that sense, I'm a little polarizing because clearly I'm just, I'm grabbing this group over here for no reason. And I'm upsetting this group over here for no reason when I've really done nothing for or against either of these people. So I think the older that I get, the less polarizing I become. Now I'm 26 years old and I'm getting close to the age of some of the other people in the space. And so, or at least it feels that way. I guess we're all moving at the same speed, but it starts to feel like a 26-year-old isn't that young. But I was like 19 when I started. So I get why some people push back against me at first.
Oh yeah, and I would say any attention is usually good attention when you run a company. But are there ever times when you need to get away from social media when your timeline or your mentions are just too negative?
I'll take breaks, but it's rarely because of negativity. Early on, that would happen. And then I realized that blocking people on Twitter is a very important thing for mental health. And almost all the accounts I block, I've probably blocked about 100 to 150 accounts, I would guess. And most of them are brand new accounts with one follower that somebody who's not man enough to say it to you with their real account is making a new account to say some shit to you. And those people, they don't have the right to do that, in my opinion. Like, and they have the right to do it, but I don't have to listen to it. So I will just block those people right away now. If someone makes one rude comment or hurls some expletive at me for no reason, it's one comment and you're blocked. And ever since I started doing that, Twitter became just such a more pleasant place. And it's funny how, and I've given this advice to some other influencers that have ended up kind of started doing it, and then they said, you know what, this was such a good idea. Like there's way less people than you think that are negative on your timeline. It'll feel like sometimes, one negative comment out of 10 total really stands out in your mind. That's the one that you take away from it. And it's sad that our brains work that way, but if you're a model on Instagram and 20 people tell you that you're beautiful and one person says your nose is too big, what do you think you're going to remember the next day? That your nose is too big, of course. So if you just block those people, there's not that many of them, but their comments just stand out. So once you block a few of them, it's all of a sudden it kind of goes away. And I don't feel like there's much negativity on Twitter. People talk about it a lot, and I think that they think it's like shameful to be blocking people, like that makes them weak. And I don't believe that. So I go ahead and block the people I don't want to hear from, and makes life a lot better.
Yeah, a couple of great points there. One being that, everyone has a right to an opinion. And like you said, they can make their accounts, but not everyone has the right to hear their opinion respected, right? So I think that's totally fine. And the comment about the model and the one negative out of 20 comments, you hear celebrities talk about this all the time. Celebrities who you see on TV, on social media all the time, and you think they have the utmost confidence, but then you hear them say, all it takes is one negative social media comment for me to go in a downward spiral, right? So it's not, from a regular person, if a celebrity can do it, it certainly can happen to anyone. And with all the screenshots and company promotion that you have on Twitter, how do you balance, or even care about, for that matter, respect from other people in the industry versus just trying to drum up new business for your site?
Yeah, I think it's really important that you're respected in the industry, or people will eventually, even if they sign up for your service and they're with you for a couple of weeks, as soon as they tell someone else in the industry that, oh yeah, I'm using DFI's picks, if no one respects the people at the company, then that'll quickly get back to the person who signed up and they'll cancel. So it is really important. But early on, I didn't get much respect. So most of my customers were just college kids who didn't follow anyone else in the industry yet. So they didn't know that people didn't really respect me. I think that was just because of my age. I don't think I had really done anything particularly wrong.
Sure.
Although there were a few kind of industry rules, I guess, that I didn't know. Like apparently you don't want to be retweeting like 25 screenshots a night. So early on, I was just like, well, I want to celebrate with all of my customers. And I genuinely had no bad intentions. I was just thinking, well, this is so cool that people are winning and they're shouting us out and they're excited about it. So I was just caught up in how exciting and cool that whole process was. And so I get why some people, like if I worked at Roto Grinders at that time, they get, hundreds of people win a night from their platform. And I didn't realize at the time that it wasn't unique to me that lots of our users were winning. So I was like so excited and retweeting it. And I get how they would look at me and be like, man, this guy's kind of annoying. But I think that my account has gotten better. I still like to celebrate with some of our users, but there's other ways to do it. There's a Discord channel now that we can celebrate with them. A lot of people just DM me on Twitter and we'll celebrate in my DMs. So it's a balance, right? But I knew that over time, I knew that the respect would come just as I stayed in the space. And I just thought, this is a time thing. There's just way too many new companies in the space for people to respect the new ones. So it just takes some time as it's like, okay, those guys have been around a while now. I think now we're considered one of the more established companies, and that's just a good way to build respect. It's like if someone opens up a stockbroker, stock advising firm, the first year they open, they're probably not going to have much respect. But then if they can stick around and they're still alive and thriving 8 years later, then how could you not respect them? They must be doing something right.
Yeah, exactly. And so speaking of the screenshots, a lot of people see screenshots and they think, well, shit, this dude never loses, right? He's posting screenshots every week or every couple of weeks. And a lot of people don't
Right.
realize that pros do, in fact, lose from time to time. So let's talk about handling swings. So, Justin, in as much or as little detail as you're willing to describe, what's the worst downswing you've had in your DFS career, either from how long the streak lasted or the total dollar amounts?
Yeah, I had, it's fun. It was actually the first like 2.5, 3 months of this past NFL season was probably my biggest downswing. I was probably 200 in the hole, 200K for the season. And, I really I more often than I usually do, I went back and was looking through my process and looking at the slates and did I get ownership right? Was the leverage there? How off from projections was I? And I just kept concluding that I wasn't doing anything wrong. And that's actually a terrible feeling. Like you'd really rather find the hole in your process and patch it than to be down bad but not have any idea what you might be doing wrong, because you can't just trust the process forever if you're gonna eventually you're gonna run out of money. But then I hit a couple of big GPPs and swung back and I closed the football season in the green. And I just kept telling my wife, I was like, this is going to turn around. She'll ask, she trusts me, but she'll ask like, well, are you sure things haven't changed? Like, is it possible that something has changed that's making it not work anymore? And so, yeah, those are tough times. You really start to question yourself. I'm fortunate now that I'm in a position where we've set aside money that's not to be gambled with. And if it all comes crashing down, and if my career ends in just a very long downswing before I just run out, we're still going to be okay. We've still set aside enough that we can say, you know what, that was a great career. It was fun. It was fun while it lasted. We still have this nest egg we've set aside as a result. And I think that's really important if you ever make it in this space and you've got plenty of money for your bankroll, you've got to take some of that and put it somewhere that there's no way you would mess with it. And it can be hard when you're on a downswing. You really want to chase losses. So if you're married, if your wife has a separate bank account, put it in her account. That's what we did. And that's when you'd have to then go to her and explain, hey, I ran out of what we set aside, what we allocated for playing, for betting. So, can I dip into this pile? And that's where then you'd have to have that tough conversation. And that would probably help you realize it's time to step back and decide if this is the right decision. If it's sitting in your bank account, it's very hard not to just fire in 5K more at a time and just keep chasing. So I think that's the plan. That's the fail-safe plan. I'll tell you if I ever end up having to execute that plan, I'll come back on this show and tell you how it went. But I think
People will love it. Believe me, people love failure stories more than success stories. So,
oh, I bet.
We'll have you on.
I'm sure. Yeah. Oh, it's relatable. But so that's kind of the plan. If you're single, then I would maybe even ask a family member if they'd hold it, or put it in, or put a financial advisor, put it with them. And I typically am not a fan of using financial advisors. I think typically you end up with less delta than you could get just chunking it into the Russell 5000 and just leaving it there forever. But the one thing they do provide is some accountability. They make it a little harder. Anytime you have to admit to somebody else that you're in a bad downswing and you need to pull money out of reserves, I think that would help you realize if you should actually stop.
Right. And so I was going to ask you about this when we talk about the lifestyle later, but since you brought up your wife and you mentioned her talking about, hey, has things changed? How do DFS financial conversations go with her? How often are you talking about the highs and lows? And generally, how invested is she in your plan?
Yeah. So She's fantastic. She is very understanding. Her father was a big poker player way back in the day, and so she's actually pretty understanding of the gambling highs and lows, and she understands that some people have an edge. Most people lose, but some people have an edge, and so she has a lot of faith in me, and I think I've explained some of the edges to her enough that she believes they exist. But that's kind of the level of her involvement. She's not particularly interested in sweating the slates. If anything, it actually stresses her out too much. We had a millie sweat last weekend. I was in first in the golf millie maker for 3 days straight, and then I went into Sunday, the final day. I guess it was Monday. I went in second place, and in the morning, I told her, I was like, oh, Oosthuizen just double bogeyed like his first hole. And she's like, you know what? I think that's the last update I want for the day. Like she's like, it's too stressful. Can you just tell me at the end when it's over? That's usually her approach. And I don't fill her in like on a day-to-day of how every slate went. She doesn't want to ride those ups and downs. I barely do, but it's just part of the business. But I try to shelter her from dealing with the ups and downs. I'll just give her the major milestone updates of like, hey, last month was horrible, we're down a lot, or hey, we just binked 100K GPP, and that's kind of the extent that she gets involved in that, because I think it would just be, it's not fair to her. Like, she has no control over it. I sometimes feel like I have no control over how these guys miss these short putts, but then she especially has no control over it because she didn't even get to pick the players. So, but it affects her life just as much as mine, right? Like, we're married, we're 50-50 on everything, so it definitely is a lot. It's a lot for your partner. It's a big ask of your partner to let these financial swings happen to them without their involvement at all. And I think that's a conversation that you need to make sure that you have with your partner, that they're willing and comfortable to have this happen, and definitely making sure that they can open a banking app or some sort of stock app or whatever, and they can see that there's still money there. I think the biggest fear, if I was married to someone who was gambling a lot, is that, am I going to just wake up one day and find out that we lost our home?
Yeah.
And that would be the biggest fear that would be in the back of my mind, that I wouldn't feel comfortable saying to my partner, because I don't want to seem like I'm doubting them, right, or that I don't believe in them, or that I even think that I lack that trust that they would communicate that to me before it was a nightmare. But that thought is always going to be, no matter how much they trust you, that thought's going to be present somewhere in their mind. And so just understanding that that's the case, and making sure that they have ways they can check on their financial status and know that you're not draining all of their money too. I think that's really important.
And it sounds like you're lucky to have a very, very understanding partner in all of this. And she has a normal job, if I'm not mistaken, right? So how does your DFS lifestyle mesh with her work schedule and her hobbies and whatnot?
Well, so she did have a normal job, and it did not mesh very well, because I have such freedom to travel and go wherever. And so she wasn't really enjoying it. And so we kind of realized that she should quit. And so now she is just doing some kind of entrepreneurial stuff, which I think is awesome. And she's yet to figure out exactly what's going to work for her. But I really respect that she's trying, and that she's doing different things in entrepreneurship, and learning a lot in the process. And just the knowledge that she gleans from what she does, even if it doesn't work, it ends up actually helping us, because she takes a look at my app and my business and gives me good advice on what we should change and modify for our company. And so, I think of her as like a co-owner of my business, even though she's not really into sports, because she can give me some good input on UX and different user experience type of things that can help. But yeah, she's just kind of seeing if there's something else for her. She's getting involved with some charity stuff in Austin that I'm proud of her for, and would like to get involved in myself to some extent. But right now she's it's in junior league, so it's women only. So I'm trying to figure out how I can nudge my way in there a little bit without cramping her style. But our schedules are much better now that she's not working a normal job. But for most people, that might not be an option yet, to have your partner quit their job, or even quit your own job. So it can be tougher, I'm sure. But yeah, like going to DraftKings events and stuff, it's nice that she can join me, and we can fly out and visit friends when we want to. And it's funny, because when you're in this space, weekends are usually busier than the weekdays. So right, we can do like a Tuesday to Thursday trip down to Cancun. We live in Austin, Texas, so it's not too bad of a flight. So Those types of trips are really nice to kind of get away from it all for a little bit, and that certainly wouldn't be an option if she had to go into a normal job.
Yeah, it's super nice to have that flexibility, and it's easy for us to say as people who do this full time. That's part of the reason why we do this type of
Hmm.
careers, because we have that flexibility. But if you're married or you have a partner, they need that flexibility too to fully take advantage of it. So I think it's important. And you mentioned your app, so let's talk about this because I get a lot of questions about what a typical day looks like when you're both a DFS player and you run a content site. So Justin, whether it's a weekday or a weekend, what's a typical or usual work day look like for you?
Typical day, usually get up around 9, make breakfast or lunch. We usually kind of skip breakfast and end up doing like an 11 o'clock lunch. And then I usually end up sitting at my desk and working from probably about 12 to 2, doing emails and kind of copywriting and various work for the website itself. Then we usually do some sort of lunch, go for a walk. We live by the river in Austin, so we try to go for walks pretty often. And then I usually sit back down at my computer around 4:30 for a 6 o'clock lock here in Central Time, and I spend about an hour and a half on the slate. And a lot of people that are pros spend the whole day on the slate, but I think one skill that's I consider it a skill, and it's kind of a shame because I don't want to advocate for cheating in school, but schools really push you to not hone in this skill, which is collaboration and trusting other people's work without having to verify it yourself. And I think that's a skill that a lot of men develop differently, like more so than women. Women are usually more diligent. They want to verify that the work is correct, which actually makes them more accurate and better performers in the sense of quality, but usually lower performers in terms of quantity. And that's just a generalization. Obviously, that does not apply to everybody. But you know, I'm fortunate that my stepmom does a lot of corporate speaking and events, and so this is all stuff that I've kind of just stolen from her content. That I think is very interesting, and I've seen it to be true in my work experience. And so I've kind of gotten really good at that of saying, you know what, I really trust that our team is going to run our model correctly today. I don't have to check every single input. I am just going to trust that the output is right. And every now and then, like probably once a month, I'll dig into the inputs and make sure that everything looks good. And that's about as often as I think you need to do a quality control check on the people that are helping run your process. Because otherwise you're going to drive yourself crazy reinventing the wheel every day, and it's a terrible use of your time. So I sit down at about 4:30 and spend about an hour and a half, and really the majority of that time is just figuring out ownership. And the war room has a lot of good plays in it. So I just trust that the war room plays are the player pool that I would want. And then I just go through that player pool and the model that we have, and I'll just eliminate the players that are highly owned. That's pretty much my process now, is sit down, look at the player pool that my team has put together, and then just knock out all the guys that are really highly owned and build the lowest owned lineup that I can that also makes sense and includes very good plays. If there's a guy that's projecting double anyone else in the field, I'm not going to fade that guy, but I'm looking to fade guys that are pretty similar in quality to other players, but maybe there's some others that aren't as obvious that are pretty close. So that's kind of my day. And then at 6 o'clock it locks. We usually make dinner, and then I'll often go watch the games. I like to sweat the games. A lot of the pros say they don't watch them at all, but I think it's not fun when you have 150 lineups. I've had a couple slates where I do 150 lineups, and I agree, it's no fun to watch. I don't blame these guys for not sweating it. I don't even know what to root for. I mean, I feel like you're constantly
You don't know. You don't know to the end, like 5 minutes left on the slate on what you need.
Exactly. I remember a funny example of that was during COVID. I was max entering NASCAR because they were running Millie Makers for it. So I was like, hey, why not?
Which you definitely don't need to pay attention to until the last 5 minutes.
Exactly. So the whole race, so Kyle Busch was like 80% owned. I'll keep this short, but he was like 80% owned, and I think I had 7% of him in my player pool. So the whole race, I'm hoping that he crashes, and he comes loose a couple times. Back of his car wiggles, and I'm like, oh man, I run so bad. He almost crashed, and I really needed him to wreck. And so the whole race, I'm rooting against him. Well, he ends up winning the dang race, and I'm sitting there fuming in my chair. I was like, he was so close to crashing. And I opened my phone and I was like, what? I'm winning 60K. And I finished like third. I had like one of my one-off Kyle Busch lineups that I was rooting against the whole race ended up almost being the nuts. And I ended up like tripling my total entries, even though I lost all the single entry high stakes stuff. And so if I only max entered, yeah, you can't even follow it at all. So I get why people don't watch. But I usually play one lineup, and I have a couple of huge leverage spots.
Right.
Like for MMA, I've often got a fighter that everyone else has the other fighter. So those, like, watching a fight like that is exhilarating. And
Which I won't get into too much, but that's probably some of the easiest leverage in high stakes at MMA, just playing the opposite fighter of the chalk. But yeah, and that's especially in MMA, right? When it's so sequential, you know what you need with each fight. I mean, that's why it's one of the best sports to sweat.
Right, and tennis would work that way if there was high stakes tennis, but no one plays it. But yeah, any sport where it's win lose, like, Dell match play coming up. I don't know when this podcast will be released, if it'll be in time for Dell match play, but that's another one, right? It's like if this one guy is chalk and he's playing directly against somebody else, you could just play the opposite guy, and massive leverage there, because all the points are distributed based on winning and losing. That's the only thing that matters in that. It is true in tennis, so it's so easy to just get leverage off the chalk. But yeah, MMA is a little trickier, right? Because there's like strike counts and takedowns and various things like that. But you can still get a lot of leverage that way. And so then I like watching. I like sweating the slate. I'll go upstairs now. We just moved into a new apartment complex that we have a golf simulator upstairs. So I'll go play around on Torrey Pines and put the games on the TV in there. So it's a good setup. And then usually go to bed around 11. I often watch a show or a movie at night with Tasha, and I'll kind of be checking the scores on the side and we watch like The Bachelor together and some other junk shows that are fun to watch. And so it's good. I don't watch fully as many games as I think some people do, but I keep up with them. I like to check the scores and see what's going on, and then I'll open up the stream if it's getting really interesting towards the end.
That's fair. And just going back really quickly, your point about trusting other people with their work. And it's really difficult in this industry or in any industry where you're risking your own money, that you really want control of what the inputs are. But because you could check literally everything, and you would spend your entire time checking, and that basically eliminates all the freedom that you want with this type of lifestyle. So I think it's really important. That's a really important point, to be able to trust other people. Really quickly, you mentioned that you do go on walks with your wife, and I know that you played sports in high school. I don't know about beyond that, but how much sports do you play now? Do you play as much as you like? Do you get in as much exercise as you'd like? It sounds like you have a pretty balanced lifestyle, but meditation, mental health, mindfulness, things of that nature, how much does that weave into your schedule?
Yeah, I think I probably do a better job of it than a lot of people, but I would like to do even better. I go on a lot of walks with my wife, which is really good quality time for us we leave our phones at home and go for about an hour, get away from screens and spend time together. I think that's really important. I would like to take a little bit more just individual time, like you talked about, like meditation. And I do think that I get, I fall into the trap of, if I'm sitting by myself, I pick up my phone and start scrolling through Twitter. And I'd like to spend more time just self-reflecting. When I'm driving, I try not to put on music or podcasts or anything, and I just try to think while I'm driving. But I don't have anywhere I have to commute to. So unless I'm I go to once a week. I do like a personal training, physical therapy type deal. It sucks. It's not fun, but it's like a lot of stretching and a lot of like random muscles that you never really use, just to try to kind of counterbalance my really stagnant work day, right? Of just sitting at my computer. So that's like one drive a week that I have, that I really am just sitting thinking by myself, but I would like to do it more often. It's tough in this space, especially like during golf season. Thursday to Sunday, you can pretty much always check your phone and look at something interesting. Like as soon as this call ends, I'll probably check how my golfers are doing.
You and me both.
So then it's kind of like you're going from one stimulation to the next, and it can be tough to step away from it. But that is why I like to go for walks and leave my phone at home. And I have come back before and I missed news that I needed to get. I've definitely lost money doing that. And you have to just accept that you could always be making more money if you never step away from your phone or computer.
Yes.
Like you'll always be more profitable at everything, trading NFTs, crypto, stocks, like DFS. You'll always make more money if you never step away from the screen. But then your life will suck. So it's some sort of balance. And when the balance swings the wrong way, where you get back from a walk and you see that you had a player late scratch, you have to, and I try not to leave right before lock, but there's been a couple times where we end up having a great time and we walk further than we thought we were going to, and I get back 2 minutes after lock. That has definitely happened. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, you've got to just remind yourself that you're choosing to sacrifice some expected value financially for positive value in your personal life. And just try to remind yourself that you made that conscious choice and that you're okay with it, because it can be very tilting. And I'll certainly fire off a tweet about how tilted I am. Don't get me wrong. I'm not just like, oh, well, bummer. Like, I definitely will tweet like, oh my God, that sucks. But I get over it pretty quickly. Usually I would say, sometimes I even time myself of how long does it take before I'm over it. And it's usually about 15, 20 minutes of being tilted before I can move on.
I mean, that's a pretty good time, honestly. It sounds like you probably whittled that down over the years, and I think a lot of people can't get it to that level, which is why they have issues with tilting and firing off bets and late slate lineups, trying to get it back. But it's always that deathbed theorem. When you look back on your life on your deathbed, which will you remember more, those walks with your wife or that couple slates that you missed lock by 2 minutes? And it's almost always going to be those walks with your wife. So, it's really important stuff about the balance. So, Justin, I'll let you get out of here. I know you want to go sweat your golf lineup. So let's give some final advice to the people out there listening. You mentioned earlier at the very top of the show about logic-based thinking and how that's important. You mentioned just now about trusting other people and trusting their work. But what would you say is the number one most important skill to have in being a DFS pro?
I would say that it's kind of what I talked about of calculating expected value in everything that you do, and then even one step further, like running a cost-benefit analysis of all of your decisions and building that kind of mental model of a CBA with your personal life factored in as well. And I think a lot of people forget to consider that. And so I've definitely heard interviews of people that say, yeah, I was a DFS pro for 4 years and I realized I was miserable, so I quit. And you hear that pretty often. That won't be my story. Like I won't let that happen. I'd rather just quit because I'm losing money than because I'm miserable. And you can't use the money that you win to buy back the time that you wasted. So if I'm not enjoying the life, like you talked about earlier, if you're not enjoying the lifestyle, like what's the point of having this job? That's the whole benefit, is that your life can be great. So I think the skill is to being able to factor all of those things in, where there is some incomplete information. You don't know for sure that you're really going to enjoy whatever trip you agree to take with your partner or the walk that you go on. You don't know if you're going to enjoy these things. You just have to guess with incomplete information and say that I think the value of going on this walk is going to be greater than the value lost financially by not going. And then also being able to calculate unknown factors, like how much does a hometown narrative matter to this specific player? How much does this injury affect this specific player? And then remembering all the examples of that in the past. And I think that's an area that I'm fortunate. I think my brain remembers well. Someone will be telling me about a slate that was the biggest slate of their life. They're like 2017, it was the NFL final, it was week 14, and there was like this late game on the slate with all this chalk. I want to say it was Packers Patriots, and one guy scored a touchdown early, and then all the chalk busted. And I'll be like, no, that was the 2017 DK final. It was week 15, and it was Steelers Patriots, and it was the backup running back for the Steelers scored, and then no one else scored after that. And they're like, what? Were you at the final? I was like, no, I wasn't, but I remember I followed the slate. And that is I'm really lucky that I can do that, because I think people often forget how certain situations play out. And so they'll make the same mistake over and over again. Every 2 years, there will be some weird scenario. And luckily, I have been in the industry for 8 years. So I'll say, oh, I've seen that happen 3 times, and this is what everybody did, and it was wrong, so I'm going to do this. And that's been really helpful for me. And I unfortunately don't know if there's any advice that I can give surrounding that if you don't just naturally remember, other than maybe take notes and have a log somewhere of when kind of unique situations occur, how should I react? And that's how I almost won the Golf Million Maker last week. Everybody was so sure that the PM AM golf wave was going to be the big advantage. And I remembered in the past that there had been times where everyone was sure about a golf weather situation and it got wonky, and then the opposite wave ended up smashing. So I played a lineup with the opposite wave that every single meteorologist would tell you was going to get screwed by the weather. And it got really messed up and weird, and the PGA let them play through rain for like 3 hours, which no one expected. And it ended up being the opposite of what everybody thought. And I don't know anything about meteorology. I just remembered that had happened in the past. And so that's, if you can keep a log of those types of very odd scenarios, like if you don't naturally remember that and you want to be a DFS pro, you should be writing down this golf event this weekend. This is what happened leading up to the slate. It's really important that you focus on the information that you had before it locked. If you just write down all the information that you got after it locked, that's worthless. You've got to know what information did I have before the slate locked, and then what actually happened. And then if you can kind of piece those things together, that'll really help you be contrarian in the future.
That's all great advice. And Justin, appreciate your time on this show, because I think a lot of people will learn a lot from what you said, a lot about the mental health side, the lifestyle, the process of playing DFS. And I appreciate you for being so open. So I'll give you the floor if you have any final things you want to talk about or anything you want to promote.
Well, I guess I have to give a shout out to my app. I think it's the best app in the space. I certainly use it far more than any other resource in the space for my own contests. And I definitely use it for sports betting. We'll send you a push notification anytime we have a new bet, and you can just open up your betting app and place the bet. And so I think it's a super convenient app, and we're always trying to make it better. We're trying to be the leading edge of app-based DFS and sports betting picks. So if you ever have any feedback, my DMs are always open, and I'll hop on the phone with you even. If you've got a lot to say, I'm always interested in getting feedback from people that use the app.
Sounds good. Thanks again, Justin. And thank you to everyone out there for listening.
Thank you so much.